we celebrate the glorious solemnity of Saint Joseph, patron of the Universal Church, but under a specific title today for this solemnity. Saint Joseph, spouse of the Blessed Virgin Mary. God ordained that Mary have a husband and that her child, Jesus, be raised by an earthly father. And so we celebrate that beautiful, wonderful mystery today, that glorious mystery today. In a recent talk about St. Joseph, Dr. John Bergsma indicated that St. Joseph is a royal worker, that he is found at the end of a long line of heirs to the throne of Israel, a line that goes back as far as David. By the time, though, that Joseph is living, the throne of Israel is occupied by a usurper, Herod. And the men who had been in the line as heirs to the throne of Israel, even including David and his son Solomon, have failed in virtue, have failed to be what Moses has prescribed to be the proper and upright ruler of the people of Israel. Dr. Bergman indicated that in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses prescribes that there are three aspects that the ideal ruler is supposed to avoid. He is not supposed to amass horses, that is military might or power. Instead, he is to rely on the power of God. 2, he is not to amass wealth or gold. Instead, he is to humble himself in poverty and rely on the providence of God. He is also not to amass wives. He's to have one wife and to remain faithful, loyal to her. We see already, my dear friends in Christ, David has failed to do this, committing adultery with Bathsheba. Solomon certainly has failed to do this. By the end of his life, Solomon had amassed, even actually in the very beginning of his reign, Solomon had amassed an immense amount of wealth, overtaxing his people. He had also amassed an immense army, a standing army, that he needed to create and build many different cities in which to house them. He also, sadly, had 700 wives and 300 concubines, this immense harem. He failed to live as God calls him to live. And these men who followed were not any less filled with vice until St. Joseph. Dr. Bergman indicates that with St. Joseph, at long last, finally, there has been a just man. A man who did not amass any military might whatsoever, such that when Herod threatens to kill the child Jesus, St. Joseph's only option, since he cannot command an army, his only option is to flee to Egypt. St. Joseph does not amass immense wealth. In fact, actually, we know that when he and Mary go to the temple after the purification of Our Lady and the child Jesus, he brings the sacrificial offering that the poorest of the poor would bring, 2 turtle doves. And then St. Joseph does not amass any wives beyond and besides Our Lady. He is utterly and perfectly continent, pure and chaste in mind, body, and spirit, and he is faithful and loyal to Mary, his only wife. At last, at last, there is one in the long line of heirs to the throne, beginning from David. One who is righteous, one who is just. And as Dr. Bergman said, you can give no greater compliment to a man at the time of Joseph than to call him righteous and just. It means that he was fully obedient to the will and to the law of God. Saints in the making. With Saint Joseph, the righteous heir to the throne of Israel, he is the righteous heir. And because Jesus is his legal son, Jesus inherits that title. He inherits becoming the heir of the throne of Israel. And he, Jesus Christ, King of Kings, sits on that throne. And he invites you and me into his kingdom where we do not need to amass any military might because he himself is our might and is our strength. We do not need to amass any material wealth because he alone is our wealth. He alone is what we value most. And we do not need to amass any physical connection with any other human person. Instead, we need to cling to him, to be one with him. Saints in the making on this feast of St. Joseph, spouse of the Blessed Virgin Mary, give thanksgiving to God for so great a gift as the saint of a man, just and righteous as St. Joseph, the heir to the throne of Israel, who, because of him and his own righteousness, raises Jesus as the heir of the throne, also just and righteous. You and I, my dear friends of Christ, we can be just and righteous as St. Joseph is by making space for grace.